Guess we can start.
Mhm.
Okay, go ahead, Carl.
Well,
Oh, Carl,
I was gonna do an
Carl
introduction.
is going to introduce
I'm going to
Carl,
introduce you, make it like a formal,
Okay.
official.
because you're a big deal, Carl.
There's Carl. Hello, welcome everybody. We are broadcasting live here from the Artist Collective in Hyde Park. It's a windy day, but I'm glad everybody could make it in our COVID-safe environment. We're here every month we have a solo room today. And this month, throughout March, is Karl Volk. We're very proud and pleased to show off his work. He's got a wonderful variety. He's got a rich stories I'm sure he's going to be able to share with us, and we look forward to. He's been, I guess, a founding member. He's been here since the beginning of the Artist Collective.
Right.
So we appreciate that. So, Karl Volk.
Well, some of you know a little bit about me, and you probably know that I grew up in Germany, but I wasn't born there. I was born in Brooklyn in 1932, August 15. And my father and mother had a butcher store on Lois Avenue. And I had a sister who was 7 years older than me. And my mother is from Slovenia. And she spoke Slovenian and she spoke German, because a lot of people from Austria had moved when it was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Those people all moved around in that big space. And so a lot of Austrian wound up in other places in Austria. And that happened to my mother's forebears. They went to Slovenia and they had land there and they had agriculture. I guess they farmed potatoes and whatever. And my mother's father was a great ladies' man, apparently. And my mother's mother had tuberculosis. And so I have some tuberculosis in me. And I was told not to have another test for it because I could get tuberculosis if I had another test. So they told me not to take another test. I had one already. So anyway, my mother's sister, and there were at least 5 young people living in the house. And my mother's father married very shortly after his first wife died. My mother's mother died from tuberculosis. So this husband that was alone now married a woman with 5 children. And so there were already 5 children there from the previous marriage. So there were 10 children. And the older people were always blamed if any problem happened between the children, you know. So there was this conflict between the children of one wife and the children of the other one. So there's a lot of contention going on. So the older girls wanted to get away from there as soon as possible. And my mother's older sister went to the United States, and she was a cleaning woman for a Jewish family, and a cook and whatever. And then she made enough money to send money to my mother, who came from the afternoon. And so my mother came to the United States, and she was also a cleaning lady and a cook for a Jewish family. And after a while, I guess she went to dances, and she met my father, who was also called Karl, and he was called Karl Volk. And he came from this very little village in Germany, which was called Holzkirchhausen. And it had 300 inhabitants. And it was about 25 kilometers from the nearest big-sized city, which was Würzburg, which is a very beautiful city and has a wonderful residence of the bishops that used to administer that area centuries ago when bishops had worldly power. and the walls inside are beautifully painted by Italian artists. The ceilings are beautifully painted, and the whole thing was destroyed during the Second World War. And they reconstructed it like nothing ever happened to it. So it's perfect. So everything you see there is done after the Second World War, although the building was originally from probably the 17th century. I'm not really sure when exactly that was built. And up on the mountain is a beautiful, beautiful castle. It's enormous. It has at least 2 museums in it. That is about history, art history, and about the different cultures that lived there. The Neolithic times, when they had spears and arrows and lived primitively, and it's about the stones and everything that you need to know about that area. I would like to, if you're interested, you could find out there. And you can get up by bus, and you can walk up, and it's a good size hill, so you have to be prepared to get your good lucks going to go up there. And in the city there are many beautiful churches, and the train station is there. That's very important because Holzkirchhausen doesn't have a train station anywhere closer than Würzburg. The one that when I had to go to school in Aschaffenburg, I had to walk from Holzkirchhausen in the fall after the potato harvest, and I had to walk to the train station, which was at least 2 towns away. So it was a very long walk, and sometimes I had somebody to walk with me, and other times I had to do it by myself. Now on the way back to Holzkirchhausen, when the vacation started, I had to walk from the train station to Holzkirchhausen through all of those 2 villages. So, and my mother did a very unusual thing. She sent me to Germany when I was 11 months old, and that's how I got to Germany. She brought me to the Bremen, which was a very famous ship named after a German city in the north of Germany by the harbor. And she brought me to the nurse, and the nurse wiped my backside when I was shitting in my diapers. And then when I was cleaned out, the soldiers, not the soldiers, but the men working on the ship carried me around. So I was loved by all those wonderful men that carried me around. And the minute I saw it myself, they gave me back to the nurse, So she had a dirty job of cleaning me up. And I arrived in Bremen, and I don't know anything about that, of course. I have no memory of that, but I just know what I was told. And my father's brother's wife, who was also childless and remained childless throughout her life, she came from this little tiny village in the south of Germany, and she had to travel by train all the way up to Bremerhaven and pick me up with her diapers and me together in the train. She had to manage to get back to Holzkirchhausen. So that was the biggest trip she ever took, and probably the only trip she ever took, was to get me from the boat and bring me to Holzkirchhausen. And that's where I grew up. And before long, so that was 1932, and then the war started about, I think, 1936, perhaps. I'm not quite sure when that war started. Somebody might say the correct time. And during that time, the Nazis went to Poland, and they took these Polish people. This is Baraska, and that's her husband. And they took thousands and thousands of Poles and put them on trains and sent them to Germany so they could work on the fields. And the reason was because the German men were at war, fighting in Poland and Russia and France and everywhere, so nobody could do the farm work because the women couldn't plow and do everything and do the household and, do the fields. So they stole the Polish people by the thousands and made them work on German farms. And that's how the Germans could eat during the war, because they had this. Yeah. And this is me. And this is apparently my uncle Otmar. Otmar was my father's brother, and he was the youngest of 5 sons of that family, the Volk family. And the mother of these 5 boys was called Apollonia, and she came from quite far away, considering the times when you didn't have cars and people didn't know each other from these distances. Like, if this was Hyde Park and somebody from Fishkill was to, that would be like another world. You'd have to walk there. And there was, that was like another world. So she was probably from as far away as, let's say, as Kingston, or further away, even like Albany or the Adirondacks or someplace like that. But she worked as a cook, I think, for a monastery, which was a little bit closer, halfway between Holzkirchhaus and Odenwald, which was another part of Germany. And they must have had an advertising in the newspaper. And the newspaper could be bought anywhere, or some newspapers were made for people to meet each other. So that's how they met. And my grandmother, Apollonia, wanted to get married, and she made a prenuptial agreement with her husband, Philip Volk. And she said, I will do the house and the garden, but I will not go into fields. I will not feed the cows. I will not feed the pigs. I won't clean this and I won't clean anything. Prenuptial agreement. She was only going to do the house. And so that's what she did. And she was a very good cook, apparently. And the boys all grew up, and none of them died from anything. So, and my father learned to be a butcher because he probably didn't have the right to become the heir to the land, and he didn't want the land maybe. So he became a butcher, and as such, he went to the United States and he opened a butcher store in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And then he met my mother, and my mother decided she wanted to go to work, and she couldn't go to work if she had a little baby in the house. That's why she sent me to Germany in 1933. Of course, she didn't know what was going to happen. A Second World War was going to come. She didn't know that. And she didn't know about Hitler that much. So she thought she was doing a good thing. And I consider she did a good thing for me, because she wasn't that good a mother anyway. And she ruined my sister. So I think I was glad that I was sent to Germany. And then because of that, I wrote a book. And Laura Bracken, who's sitting right here, helped me enormously in putting the book together, putting the punctuation into proper places and making the paragraphs so they were readable and interesting. Anyway, Maraska came with her husband. He worked at another home, and he did the plowing for the family because the husband was at war. And the mother had 2 small children, two little girls. So that was the only way that they could, make a living, by having somebody else work for nothing on their farm and plow the fields. That's what he did. He didn't get paid. She didn't get paid. All the time she was working in our house and in our fields. Okay. But we had a restaurant, sort of a beer joint, but they served something to eat too occasionally. So that's what this picture is about. Now on the farm, see the farms in Germany are in a village, and they have to go from the village out to their field. but all the fields aren't together. One field might be there, and one field might be over there, and one field might be that way. So you had to walk from one field to another field to till it, you know. So it was a lot of walking was done by those people. And of course we had cows, and the cows were in this stable that had windows. And this is my aunt Carolina milking the cows. And of course the calf isn't getting any milk. She's probably getting a little bit of milk, but it's also other foods, you know. And then the calves were usually sold for slaughter. So that was the painting about this, and there was a lot of cow shit in the straw there, and that had to be cleaned out every day. A new straw had to be, yeah. And there was a mountain of manure outside the kitchen window, and there were no screens, so the flies just freely came right into the kitchen and burned all the food. And nobody got sick, you know, because they were so used to that. But that's how we lived. There were no screens in any windows in the entire village. They have screens now, but they have no manure now. So. And Baraska had 3 children. Well, at least 2 girls I know of. I think maybe there were 3. And here she's feeding her baby in one of the restaurant rooms, and this is outside. The other inn was on the other side of the street, so that's the inn. The radio played Germanic music, you know. And Hitler was on the radio, and sometimes the men would sit around the table at night, and Hitler was going on, and he was very loud and very determined to speak, you know. So everybody listened and applauded. And that's what happened in here. That's why we have the swastikas, but they were also Roman Catholics. So that's why we have the swastikas of the Roman Catholic Christian cross there. And I watched her feed her children. And so that's Baraska feeding her children. Whoops. And Baraska did a lot of work in the fields. And this is Fritz. And Fritz is a boy from another family. And the Nazis decided that, for whatever reason, they didn't like his parents. So they split them up and they gave Fritz to Ottmar. And his sister was brought to another family, a farmer, and she worked on that family's house. And Fritz worked in our family, and he was about 3 years older than I was, and he was much stronger than I was because I was a delicate kid. And here I am in the field, and this is a crop, which is a kind of it's a tuber that grows in the ground like potatoes, and it has green leaves on the top. And these green leaves, the first layer becomes yellow and wants to fall off. So we have to go and take those and throw them on the ground. And then you take the second layer of leaves and you take them off and bundle them and you put them on a cart and you bring them to the cows and the pigs. And that's how you feed the cows and the pigs, by taking these extra leaves off the plant, which the plant doesn't have to have anymore. Only the new growth is on the plant. And so the ones that are not needed by the plant are fed for the animals. And I guess I was bothering Baraska. And here's Fritz telling me to stop bothering Baraska. Was in charge of getting the work done. And so he had to boss me and Baraska. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. My question is, where did the imagery that you have, these are your paintings, right?
Yes.
Where's the imagery coming from?
Memory.
Just memory. Thank you.
Yeah, that's memory, right. I made that up, you know. The field didn't look exactly like that, but it was near a forest, you know, where I I snuck away and went into the forest because I didn't want to do the work, you know. So Alaska couldn't do that, you know, but I did it, you know, even though I wasn't supposed to do it either. Yeah. And of course, because some of the children were older than I was when I arrived in 1933 in this village, you know, so some of the children were upset about the fact that there was this American child there in the village, you know, because they were the homegrown kids and they were important, you know. But here was this American kid, you know, and he had no business being there, you know. So this girl, well, one of them, Teresa Bauna, she said, well, why don't you go home, you Amerikaner, you know? So I was like 4 years old, you know, I didn't know what an American was. And I didn't know why she wanted me to leave because I only knew that where the village, that's the only thing I knew. I didn't know anything about Brooklyn, you know, and I didn't know what America was. So I went home crying to my aunt Carolina. And I said, Teresa said, I was an American. You know, I probably didn't even say that exactly right, but I was crying like crazy. And here's Carolina telling me, I'm telling her what she said, and then she's telling me that, yes, you are really from America, and you came here, and I was 4 years old probably when that happened. And I was astonished that she was not my mother, you know, because I thought she was my mother, and I called her Mama as long as she lived, you know. And there's a big linden tree in the village. This is an enormous ancient tree, and it died about 10 years ago, finally. You know, it's very ancient. And they planted a new linden tree there. So the picture looks similar again with this enormous, it's not as enormous as it was. And this is in one of the rooms in the house. And this is a little opening in the wall where they could take beer or food in and out from the kitchen, which is outside of here. So you could pass food in here. And they had wood coal stoves in the house. There was no heating system. And the upstairs had no stoves or heating systems at all. You had water bottles you could bring up in the wintertime and put in the bed, you know. So we had water bottles, or we had ceramic jugs with hot water, and you bring it up to the bed with you. As you go into the bed, you can get your feet warm at least, you know. So it was pretty cold, those rooms, I must tell you. So this is me telling the story of how Teresa called me an American, and I was very upset about it. And when the war ended, the Russians came. When the war ended, the Russians came and took all those Polish people away. Of course, the Polish people didn't really know where they were going because the Russians didn't tell them that they were going home. You know, they weren't sure. Now here Baraska had been taken from Poland, her home, to Germany, and now the Russians are taking them someplace else. Probably, hopefully they brought her back to Poland. But for all you know, they could have brought them to Siberia, you know, so they didn't know where they were going. And she had children. And so she was given this very old house to live with. In one room in that house was suitable for living, and there was a stove in there. So in the wintertime, they get wood from our family, and they could heat one of the rooms in this house. And that's where they slept. They worked in our house on the fields, but they slept in this house here. Okay? So at night, they were gone from the house, and in the morning, the husband went to the farm where he worked, And she came to our house and she did work, and she worked there all day long. And then they went back together again. And that's how they made their children in this house here. And when the Russians came, she put whatever she had on the truck. And here I am watching her, wondering where her husband is and where the children were, because she was ready to go. And the husband was nowhere in sight at that particular moment. So hopefully all the Russians got all the right people together into the truck and carted them off. I have never heard from them because I don't know where they went or what their names were. So they hopefully they went back home. And the reason this, when she came, she had a beautiful dress on. She was barefoot, and her husband was barefoot, but she had a very beautiful dress on. And he was in a black pants and a white shirt. And so he looked like a groom. So I think that the Germans caught him on their wedding day as they were coming out of church, and they corralled them to the train or the truck to bring them to Germany. That's probably exactly what happened. So now this sculpture, I did that as a result of a workshop in Sarasota. I had a friend in Sarasota, Bob Richardson, and in the last 2 years, he's told me that I was a thief. He told me that I stole shirts from him. And I don't know how he thought that, because I don't remember doing any stealing from him. But anyway, we can no longer write, and I can no longer visit him. But I was in Sarasota visiting him, and there's a very beautiful art center in Sarasota. And there was a woman giving instructions on how to make puppets, but somehow I couldn't follow her directions. So I did that instead. When I did this when I came home to New York State after visiting my friend Bob Richardson. And I took twigs. The legs are twigs and the arms are twigs, and the twigs go into the head, and the head is paper mache and the hands are paper mache. And I fashioned the clothing and bought those little decorative items. And I found a little nest with 2 birds' eggs in it. And she has birds' feathers in her hair. And she is supposed to be a goddess of the Mayan civilization. Of course, she's not dressed in Mayan costumes because I didn't know how they looked. So she's dressed in modern style clothing, but she's supposed to be a goddess. And Ixchel is the name of the goddess. And I think that's spelled with an X at the beginning. And that's Ixchel, I think. It's the best I can think of naming it. And this is a linoleum print here. And linoleum, you take a knife and you cut pieces away, and that's the empty spaces. And the dark spaces is where the ink is under linoleum is printed on paper. And the next piece is also a print, but it's not a linoleum print. It's done on a metal plate and it's inked, and the ink goes into the lines that you chiseled into the metal, and then you wipe the plate clean. So only the ink is only in the lines inside the metal. And the paper is moistened, and they have wonderful printing machines there with a big wheel like this big around, and you put the plate on and paper, and then you wind the wheel, and it goes through, and then it prints on that paper. And the ink is sucked out of the moist paper. It's sucked out of the little lines, and from the pressure, and that's how you get the lines on the paper. And we have some a drawing thereby, which is made with colored chalk, and then we have a collage here. And these newspaper figures were football players, and I made them into dancers. And there's another print here from I did it at a women's studio. And I found this photograph of a gentleman that lived maybe 100 years ago. And I made a copy of sort of a portrait of him. And it's called the sainted ancestor. And this is a scribble picture, and it's called The Three Dancers. And I have hundreds and hundreds of these small pictures that are scribble pictures that I just scribble to music or just absolutely nothing. And so there's a lot of them have sort of a musical quality. This is again about dancing. And this is sort of dancing too, but this is a dead bird. And it's the bird is much bigger than the people. And it's called, these are the killers. And the mourners are these animals here that are mourned that the other bird is dead. So it's called Killers and Mourners. And it's a print. And it's been printed several times because this is one plate and this is another plate. And this is another plate, and they could be placed together on the same printing platform. So they could be printed at the same time or sometimes in different stages, because in between you have to make the paper wet again and let it absorb water, and then you have to dry most of the water off, but the paper has to stay soft from the water in order to pull out the ink from these lines that are there. Let's see. And here's a photograph of me having coffee with a bowl around my neck. And this is Times Square. It's a photograph of three men pushing the snow. And I happened to be there at the same time that another person took the photograph who happened to be in the newspaper or magazine trade. So he made a lot of money by making that picture. But mine is not a copy of his picture. I actually took it myself. Okay. I think that's about all I can say. Would you like to ask me any questions?
I have a question. You've gone through two challenges as a young child. The first was to be an American in a German country and instantly viewed with suspicion. But then when at age 14, you had the same problem.
Yeah.
Speaking German, not knowing any English.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're way over that. But can you comment on coming back to Brooklyn at age 14?
The thing is, because Germany is basically a white country, but where my mother's and father's butcher store were is Bedford-Stuyvesant, it's an all black neighborhood. So that was quite a shock to me, to come off the boat and being shipped to a black neighborhood, So that was quite a change. And my mother had me carry the groceries for the ladies to their house. So that was kind of nice for the black ladies to have a little white child helping them with their groceries, So that was very nice for them, Yeah. So I was after school, I would help them with their groceries from the store to bring it to their house and so forth. But I walked through the neighborhood to go to Boys High. Boys High was within walking distance from my mother's store. And I went there and that was fine. And then I went to college, Brooklyn College, which I had to take a train. I had to walk to quite a ways to the subway and then take the train to go to Brooklyn College. And there were two other people that had to take the same trains as I did. So we would walk together from the train station, which is quite a ways from the college, and walk to college. And at night, I would do the same thing in reverse. And then at one time, my mother was bothering her tenants upstairs. She wanted to charge them more money, and she wanted them out of the house. So she was very nasty to those people. You know, she would scream at them every time they came up and down the stairs. And she was as unpleasant as she could possibly be. And I didn't want to be home to hear all this, you know. So I stayed at college from morning to night, you know. And then she thought that the college was keeping me instead of me keeping myself at college. So she went to the college and complained why they're keeping her son so long at college. And
Yeah, the jig is up. You found out.
yeah,
I would love to know the process of the work. I think it's printed on the right.
Say that again.
On that wall,
The red one?
yeah, red, white, and black.
she this one here,
Yeah, I do.
this one,
Up.
this one.
She said she'd like to know the process
Is
of
that a
how you made it.
watercolor?
The price of it.
Process.
How did you make it?
This is a print.
I know.
This was put out through that press, you know.
How many plates did you use?
I think these were two separate pieces that I worked separately, and then I put them on the paper when this was already there,
So
you know, and
collage?
then I put it through again, you know, with it, because this was this black ink was done separately,
Okay.
and this was done separately, and then the piece of paper that had the black ink was laid on top of this. And then this whole thing was rolled through again. So this was fresh ink that was already red. And then the papers with the black ink were laid on top of it. And then it was rolled through again. That's how you get the two colors.
Thank you.
So I have a question, Carl. When are we going to get to see your book?
Oh, well, you have to ask Laura Bracken here because she knows more about that than I do.
Everything is, we've been working with a publisher up in Rhinebeck. And everything is basically done, except that he had to get onto, there was back cover choices. So he's just working on a back cover that you can approve of. So it should be ready to publish really, really soon. So hopefully within the next few months, we should have a real actual book.
Yeah, the book is going to be called Stories from a Blue Bag. And the why I picked that title is because my mother made a blue bag for me. It was a shoulder strap, you know, with a bag. And I had that bag for years and years and years, you know. I would take it everywhere. And at some point I left it somewhere, you know, and I don't have it anymore. But I think that I put the ideas for this book in that bag, you know, mentally speaking as a metaphor. And it honors my mother because she made the bag for me. So in a way that saying the blue bag out of her blue bag, it's from what my mother created this idea of sending me to Germany, and that's how the book could have existed, because if she hadn't done that, there wouldn't be a book, you know.
Why?
Yeah.
Carl, you taught at a number of upstate school districts teaching. You were in Oriskany teaching. You were in Spackenkill, but even a third school. You taught at 3 different school districts.
I think I had more than 3 jobs.
Oriskany, Spackenkill.
Yeah, my first job was in Margaretville. Yeah, in Margaretville.
Wow.
My first job was in Margaretville as a teacher, you know. Before that, I worked in advertising agencies, but I only cut mats, you know. I just did very rudimentary things. I didn't do any art for the advertising agencies. Yes.
Just stretching my
No.
arms.
Okay, so I'm what did I say? Spanish. Now, what district? What town did I just say I worked? Margaretville. In Margaretville, I had to go to the classrooms of the elementary children and the the older children would come to my room, but there were very few people who came and did that. But what they wanted to know was mechanical illustration, because there was a factory that they wanted to work on, but I was never taught how to teach mechanical, illustration, where you had to be very precise about that. So fortunately, it was only 1 or 2 students that wanted to do that. So I didn't mess up too many people there. Yeah. And one time I told some 7th graders to be very careful with matches near this glue, the little glue that's it smells. What is it called? It's a
Rubber cement.
It's a paper glue that comes that's clear, and you put it on, and it burns very easily. So I told him not to use matches. One pulled a match right out of his pocket and put it to that bottle, and there's a flame coming out of that glue bottle in the classroom. And I said, throw it out the window, so make sure that it's out there. So he threw it out the window, So this is what happens in schools. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know the post coming back to US story, right? I know very little about you, but every single encounter I've had with you, you use a lot of humor to express yourself. And I think your pieces, especially the dancing, which you have a lot, sort of are very much that jovial and happy, and for someone who comes from that background, right? And you speak in a way, I got emotional with the departure from Harishka, whatever her name is, and the separation. Did you have a hard time as a child to grasp with that and understand, and how the process came to be where you can talk about it in such a light way?
Well, it was a long time ago, and I've been through that mentally many times, so I'm not in that situation, because I had a good life there, basically, my aunt Carolina, she loved me, and Uncle Otmar was very kind to me, and of course he had Fritz to tell Fritz off, so he didn't have to tell Nathan off, but he told Fritz off, So he had his outlet there, and because we had an inn, there was always beer to drink, So I had a lot of beer, When I was a kid, I brought the beer, and it was delivered every month from the factory in Wertheim. They came and brought the beer in bottles and in big kegs, had it under in the basement, wherever it was cool. Oh, and we had ice. We had ice. The ice man came with the big long pieces of ice, and so they were put in with the beer. So that's how the beer gets cold. Yeah.
The beer hall has been in your in the family for maybe 100 years. Then it was in existence.
Oh,
in
yeah.
Your childhood, and it's still going
the
today,
house was
right?
built in 1600 something. Yeah,
But
pretty
in
sure.
the business, the serving.
That house has half of it torn down about 10 years ago. They built a new house where the old house was, and the restaurant part is still standing, and that used to be originally a stable for the cows, and that became the restaurant where they serve beers. And it's a beautiful place with big windows, and some of my paintings are in that room. And my cousins Eva and Monica, they are the offspring of my cousin Walter Volk. Walter Volk is my cousin from his father Heinrich. Heinrich was my father's brother. So Otto was his son, and Otto married a lady from the next town, and he had 2 children with this lady, and that was Ava and Monica. And Ava is married and she has 2 children from a gentleman who lives 2 towns away in a Protestant area. See, certain areas of Germany, everybody's Protestant, and other areas is all Catholic, you know, because the ruling class decided what religion is going to be in that area. And so if you didn't want to be a Protestant in a Protestant place, you had to leave, you know, and go to a Catholic place. That's how things were done at that time. Yes.
Carl, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in Aschaffenburg?
Say what?
Your experience in Aschaffenburg with
Oh.
your Uncle Otto and FWC.
Oh, yes. I should thank you for reminding me. In Aschaffenburg, my father's brother, Otto Volk, lived with his wife, Lizzie. Lizzie came from near the French border. So she spoke French and German. And my uncle Otto learned French and English. So he knew 2 languages and he taught these 2 languages at a teacher's college in Aschaffenburg. And that's where I stayed when I lived in Aschaffenburg. And the house we lived in was owned by a rather well-known painter because he painted very large altarpieces in which the Pope appeared and Saint Mary appeared and Jesus appeared on the cross and all kinds of saints appeared in
You mean
these-
pictures of,
these paintings.
Yeah.
These are big
pictures of it.
pictures of it. Pictures of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was a very good painter.
Sorry.
And his name was Adalbert Hock, Hock. And unfortunately, I don't have any images of his work, but I have seen several of his paintings. In fact, one painting was in the next village of Holzkirchhausen, and that village was called Holzkirchen, without the house and on the end. And there was a monastery for men, and they had this round church. And in the round church, it's very unusual to have round churches, but there was this huge altarpiece that Adalbert Hock had painted. So it was in the next village from where I was an original Adalbert Hock painting. So I know that one, okay? And Pope is in there with the crown with the 3 tiers on it. And I remember that part. So I don't know who else is in there, but there are very well-known saints in there besides the Pope of that time.
Tell us about the bird on the wire and Albert Hoch.
Oh yes. Well, when I was in Aschaffenburg, I went to a special school, which was called a gymnasium. It's spelled exactly the same as gymnasium here. But in German, a gymnasium is a school that prepares you for university. So they teach you Latin. The first classes you go to is Latin. And they do also have an art class once a week, I think. And I wanted to draw birds on a wire, little birds. And I couldn't figure out how I could draw a line and how to put the feet of the birds on the line. So I went to Mr. Adalbert Hoch in his studio, and I asked him, I had such a hard time drawing these pictures with the birds' feet and everything. So he says, give me the paper. So he drew it for me, you know. He put the telephone wire and he placed the 3 birds on the telephone wire. So that was an original Adalbert Hoch, but I don't remember where the heck that is, you know. But I don't have the original Adalbert Hoch paint. It's a drawing, it's just pencil. But still, he did it in 5 minutes, you know, or less. Yeah. And sometimes some very fancy cars came because the people who had their portrait painted had a lot of money, you know. So I remember this man coming, this beautiful red car, which he parked right in front of the house, you know, and he went upstairs to have his portrait painted. So he was, in his old age, he painted portraits. Yes,
Carl, after you went back to Brooklyn, how many times have you been back to Europe? And did you stay for any length of time?
oh yes, I've been to Europe many times to go to Holzkirchhausen. Yeah, consider that my home, you know, Holzkirchhausen is my intellectual home, you know, that's where I grew up, so I consider that as my home. Yeah. I've been there many times and I have been to Aschaffenburg, but all those people are dead now, you know, Carolina and Ottmar, and Otto and Lizzie. Yeah, and Lizzie was an unfortunate woman in the sense that she bore 3 children, all boys, and they all died in infancy. So that was a very tragic lady, you know, to have this happen to her. And as a consequence, she hated physicians with a passion. And every physician sign that she went by, she spat on the floor to show her disregard and her hatred for the doctors, because she considered that they were unable to keep her children alive, you know. I mean, after all, 3 children, you know. That's really terrible for a woman to have that happen to her. Yeah, that's very sad. Yeah, and Mr. Adalbert Hook had several children. Of course, I knew only one, and she served a household for him downstairs on the 1st floor. And I believe her name was Anna. And upstairs in the attic, there lived a gentleman that had a very bad bent back, you know, so he'd walk like this here, you know. And I didn't know his name, but a person that has a bad back, sometimes German common, is this buccal. Buccal is the back of your anatomy, you know, but it's not a nice word, you know. So I said, Herr Buccal to him, you know. But I didn't know that was not his name. I just heard people talk about him, you know. That's Herr Buckel, yeah, but this was a nasty word, you know, so I shouldn't have said that. But I didn't know the difference, you know. But anyway, he and the daughter of Adalbert Hook, Anna, they took me hiking in the woods, you know. And one time, the Spessart is within a day's reach. You can. You know, in an hour you would be there perhaps by train, you know. And then we'd go walking in the woods, and it was very hot. And we stopped at this restaurant, and they had sour cream, and they gave me sour cream and rye bread, and that was the best thing I ever ate in my life, you know. It was so wonderful, this cool sour cream after a hot day of work, walking in the woods. It was perfect. It was like eating ice cream and something like that, you know. So it's really wonderful. Okay. Now we've hiked in the woods.
Yeah.
And I had to clean the pigsties. That was my job when I was a kid, you know. So I had, you know, you have a stick and you have hooked wire, you know, metal, like a fork, but it's hooked, you know. And you drag the stuff out of the pigsty, and then you have to drag it across to the manure pile and put it there. And the manure pile would grow and grow and grow and grow until the right time of the year came, and then it was loaded up in wagons and brought to the fields, and then it was distributed over the fields, and then it was plowed under, see? And that's how you got rid of your manure. And underneath the manure was an empty space, and that was full of urine, you know, from the cows, from the people, from the rainwater, from whatever liquid ever came down in there. And that was pumped up and put into a hollow wooden thing or metal thing. And in the fields, they went to the fields and they opened the back, and all that liquid came out into the fields. And that was how you grew your vegetables and your corn and your wheat and your whatever, you know. And so that's how that was recycled. So
You
everything was
absolutely
used.
had to have that on the fields.
Mhm.
That had to go on the
It
fields.
had to go on the fields. That was the best thing for the fields, and it was also the only way to get rid of it, you know. So that was perfect to get rid of it. They had an electric pump, but before electricity, they had to do it by hand, you know. That was really hard, you know. to get that liquid up, that smelly liquid, and put it in something and bring it to the field. That was terrible, before electricity. Thank goodness they had electricity. And they had coal and they had the wood from the forest. Everybody in the village had a piece of forest, and they could use the wood to cook with and to heat with. Because all the food we cooked was done by putting wood into a big stove, with about 4 or 5 round things. You put the pots on it and make hot water, because that's the only hot water you had. There wasn't any hot water machine or anything like that. You couldn't turn on a shower. There was no shower. But the Nazis put a shower into Holzkirchhausen by adding a building onto the kindergarten. And that is where my Aunt Carolina loved to go to take a bath, to be with her. So that's how we got clean after we had a first public shower in the village. So it was about 3 or 4 stalls, and you could have several people take a bath there. But before that, for centuries before that, there was no way to do them. So you had to sit in a chair and put your feet in a hot water or something like that and sponge yourself. That's the only way you could wash yourself. Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about the day of the train?
The tree?
The day of the train. The train. You saw the-
The day, but I was being shot at, you mean?
You want to tell us?
Remember the practice
Yeah, right.
of the train?
Yeah. Yeah. See, during the war, the children were asked to go out and collect samples of medical plants. And these plants were made into tea for the German soldiers on the front. So the schools, and so I went out and I was looking for a certain kind of plant that's called Schachtelkraut in German. And that happened to be growing on a slanted hillside. And below that was the train tracks. And on the other side, it went up again, this ground went up. And I was there on that field going down with my little basket where I wanted to put in the Schachtelkraut to bring it to school the next day. And all of a sudden, there's a man running from over there past me, a little bit higher up, running so fast, to get away. It really had to go. So I was looking at him. Boy, he really has to go someplace fast, something terrible is making that man run. And before long, there comes a train. The train stopped, and the German soldiers came marching this way from where the man had run. And he would have shot that man if he had gotten to that, because that man had jumped off the train to run, because he was probably Jewish going to a concentration camp. So he wanted to get away from that train. And then the train came towards me down, and I looked down into the train, and they were people, standing next to each other like this here, men and women together, no cover, nothing. If it rained, they got wet, no toilet, nothing, just standing there. I said, those poor people, what if they had to go to the bathroom real bad? What the hell would they do? I thought about it. My God, I'm glad I'm not in that train. I said to myself, I wouldn't want to be in that position. And they were Jewish people probably, or other peoples that went to the concentration camp. So I remember that. That was it. And I was trying to do something good for the German army by getting, good things from the field, but from the field medical plants, That's the way things were. Yeah.
So when did you get shot at? When did you get shot at?
Oh, well, I was in a train going from Aschaffenburg to Holzkirchhausen on a train. And there are seven tunnels between Frankfurt and Würzburg, because they're going through a mountainous area called the Spessart. the Spessart is like maybe, the mountains up in the Catskill. So it's a mountainous area. And they have very small valleys and the people don't have much fields because they can't. But anyway, the train came out of one of the tunnels, and there was fighter planes, and they shot with their machine guns at the train that I was in. So they were coming, shooting at the train I was in. So I went under one of the benches, which we sat on. But I don't think our particular train didn't get any. But they could have, I could have died right there, been wounded or something, But luckily, nothing happened to me. And when I got to my train stop, I had to walk to Holzkirchhausen, which was through 2 or 3 villages from Trenfeld to Holzkirchhausen. Because there's a Main River. There's a river that goes along there. And there was a ferry that brought you across the Main River. And then you had to keep walking through Homburg and Wüstenzell. Homburg and Wüstenzell, and then up this big mountain and down another mountain, and then you got to Holzkirchhausen. Yeah.
Carl, one
Yeah.
time you told me a story about 2 men showing up at the door and asking if you wanted to go to America.
Yeah, that was in Aschaffenburg, yes. Well, in Aschaffenburg, at some area where I was going to the gymnasium, I saw a soldier across the street writing in a notebook, I said, well, that's an easy job for a soldier to do, to stand and write in a notebook, But it was cold. I said, I wonder if he has cold feet while he's doing this, But I didn't think about him writing in a notebook had anything to do with me, but it did. He noted when I left, and he wrote when I came back, and he wrote when anybody in the building left and came back. So this was for quite a long time, maybe a month or 3 weeks that he did that, but just writing a note, who was coming or going. But I didn't know that's what he was doing. I just knew he was writing, but I didn't know what he was writing. What he was writing is when everybody came and went. So he knew there was going to be a special day when nobody was home except me in the whole house. And on that day, the bell rang. I was the only one in the apartment. So naturally, I opened the door, and there are 2 SS officers, polished. Their boots were reflecting the surfaces, and they were shining, and there was a German Shepherd dog, staring at me. I said, oh my God, what's this all about? Oh, and I knew I was alone in the house, and I knew they could take me, and I would have no choice but to go, So I says, I hope it doesn't come to that. Well, they said, well, because you're American, we wondered if you would like to be exchanged for a German officer who's in the United States, and we want him back, and you can go in his place, and we will exchange you, Would you like to do that? Oh, I said, no. Oh, no, I'm studying here at the gymnasium, and I want to finish my studies here, and so they didn't take me. They left, and they saluted, and, I was left alone, and there, I was happy that they didn't forcibly take me anywhere, which they could have done. So apparently I convinced them of my sincerity about studying in school.
How old were you at that time?
Well, it was about a year. Well, probably 13, maybe.
Oh.
less,
I
yeah.
figured it out, it was about 11.
Yeah,
I
but
did-
Wow.
I did a little bit of
11.
math
maybe
with
not
it.
even that much, maybe closer to 11 or so.
Too young to be taken away from home.
Yeah, I didn't notice the time, how old I was. It didn't occur to me at that moment. I was just glad that they left, Beautiful, beautiful uniforms. Spit and polished, Yeah. That was interesting. In retrospect, it was interesting,
Yeah, right.
You survived.
But then finally I understood why that man had been writing, it didn't dawn on me then, but about 20 years later, when I thought about it,
Right.
oh, that's why that soldier was standing there writing, I had to be an adult to realize that, I couldn't think of that as a 10-year-old, that just, the two things didn't mesh, He was writing and they were separate things, but they were related. Yeah.
I know when you do your gallery hours, you're always painting, you're always busy in the kitchen. Do you have any other big projects?
No.
You're just always gonna dabble or paint?
Yeah, that's my scribble pictures.
Yeah, I love those. I would love to see them.
Yeah, I got hundreds and hundreds of them. Okay. I'm having somebody cut a mat for them. There's 6 openings in there.
Right.
And I tried to do it myself. The first cut I made, went on it. The first cut, I said, Carl, you're not ready for this, And I brought a new piece of mat board to a lady down in the plaza down in Wabanger Falls. It's called hobnobbing or something like that. And then she's cutting the holes into the mat, and I'm going to put 6 pictures in. It's going to be about this big, a piece, about this big with six little scribble pictures in it. Yeah, she's going to charge me $40 for making the holes, which is not too bad for all that work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you very much. Carl's Works will be here for the next 2 weeks through end of March. And then, his work will always be here on the wall somewhere. We appreciate his participation. The next solo show will be Ilga Ziemenkurens. She'll be here through April. And we'll be having a new exhibit starting April through May. So everybody come welcome Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
I gave about 300 pictures minimally away to senior citizen in the senior citizen housing. I loaded the car full of 30 pictures at a time. I would drive them and I said, here, take them, So I gave away a lot of my work for free. So that was a very expensive present I gave away.
Maybe
And
that
I have about 100 left in my house, maybe that much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great
Thank you.
stuff, Carl.